The steel door to the detached garage slammed open with a deafening crash, hitting the concrete wall like a gunshot in the still, cold air. The sound exploded in the silence, echoing through the space as if announcing my very collapse. A harsh wedge of afternoon sunlight sliced through the gloom, blinding me for a moment. I recoiled instinctively, stumbling back onto my thin, stained mattress, feeling like an animal caged in fear. My heart hammered against my ribs, desperate and wild. I raised a trembling hand to shield my eyes, bracing for the inevitable confrontation. I expected to see Marcus, the man who had been my tormentor for months now, come to deliver another scolding, or maybe another shove. But instead, a figure stood in the doorway, too lean, too rigid with shock. It wasn't Marcus. It was Lucas. My son. My boy, whom I hadn't seen in 6 long months. His presence sliced through me like a blade, sharper than the bitter chill in the air. Standing there in a tailored wool coat that looked absurd in this place, surrounded by oil stains, dust, and cobwebs, he took a hesitant step forward. I could see the dust motes swirling around him, dancing in the sudden light. His expensive leather shoes crunched against the gritty, unfinished floor, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Dad." His voice wavered, fragile and terrified, as if he had never called me that before. A lump formed in my throat, and my breath caught. "It's Lucas." I hadn't expected this. His worried eyes scanned the grim surroundings, the bucket in the corner, the frayed blanket wrapped around my shoulders, the bruise on my cheek. He froze. His face crumbled, and then he rushed toward me, dropping to his knees on the cold concrete. Without a second thought for his fancy suit pants, his hands hovered over me, afraid to touch as if I were made of glass, fragile and about to shatter. "Dad," he whispered again, his voice breaking, and in that moment, I saw everything he had become in the time we had been apart. "Lucas," I rasped, my voice foreign to me, thick and rusty. I hadn't spoken in what felt like forever. "You shouldn't be here. If Marcus sees you." "To hell with Marcus." Lucas spat the words, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and growing fury. "Why are you here, Dad? Why are you living like this? You have a pension, a retirement fund. You worked for 45 years as a structural engineer. You're getting $7,000 a month. Why are you living like a dog?" 7,000. That number rang in my ears, a cruel reminder of the life I once had, before it all slipped away. Before I could respond, a shadow fell over us. The light disappeared. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Marcus. His presence always felt like a storm cloud, dark and suffocating. I could smell his cologne, expensive and masking the stale scent of tobacco that always seemed to cling to him. "That's $7,000. Marcus's voice oozed with arrogance. "It's mine now," he said smoothly, like it was an afterthought. "I'm keeping all of it." Lucas's body went rigid. Slowly, he turned his head toward Marcus. His expression flickered with a flash of disbelief, then something colder. The man who was supposed to take care of us, a man who promised to protect us, was now the very one who had cast me into this hell. Standing in the doorway like a warden, Marcus didn't even flinch at the tension in the air. Behind him stood Sarah, my daughter. My little girl. She couldn't even look at me. She was staring at the ground, her wedding ring spinning around and around her finger as if it could erase the guilt that hung between us all. Lucas's eyes darted to her, waiting for a sign, any sign, that she would speak up, defend me. But there was only silence. Sarah was as silent as she had been when Marcus shoved me into the corner months ago, when she let it all happen. Lucas's voice, steady but full of disbelief, cut through the thick silence. "What did you just say?" I said, "The pension is mine," Marcus repeated, crossing his arms and leaning against the doorframe casually, like this was just another boring discussion. Legally and rightfully, your father signed a power of attorney. I control the assets, I control the house, and given his declining mental state, I decided the garage was the safest place for him. Less trouble for everyone. Less trouble for everyone. I saw Lucas's shoulders stiffen. He looked from Marcus to Sarah, the silence between them deafening. He was searching for a shred of hope, some shred of humanity in his mother's eyes. But Sarah just shrank further behind Marcus, her expression as hollow as it had ever been. It was in that silence that I realized. Lucas was on his own. Then Lucas did something that confused Marcus. He didn't scream. He didn't throw a punch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Tapping the screen, he checked something, slid it back into his jacket. And then, as if making a decision, he unclasped the platinum watch from his wrist, a Patek Philippe, the one I knew he'd bought to mark his partnership at the architecture firm in Chicago. He placed it gently on the dusty workbench between him and Marcus. The sound of the watch clicking against the wood echoed in the heavy silence. That watch? Marcus's eyes flickered to the watch greedily, then to... The garage was cold, but it wasn't the biting air that made me shiver. It was the weight of the truth settling around me, each moment a reminder of everything I had lost. The watch lay shattered on the concrete floor, a symbol of what was left of my dignity. Marcus, with all his swagger and arrogance, had no idea what had just begun. He was too busy thinking he had won. He didn't see Lucas standing there, calm, plodding. It was the look of a man who knew exactly what needed to be done. I had seen that look before, in my younger days, when I worked with a team of architects. That cold precision, the focus that made even the most difficult project seem possible. But this wasn't about building structures anymore. This was about rebuilding me, and Lucas had already begun. As I sat there, trying to wrap my mind around what had just happened, I felt a flicker of hope. A spark that had been smothered for months, maybe even years, was finally lighting up in my chest. I wasn't just waiting to die anymore. I was going to fight. Marcus thought he had everything. The house. The money. My pension. He didn't know how far I would go to take it all back. But as I sat on that cold floor, wrapped in the frayed remnants of my life, I couldn't ignore the truth. The truth that had been creeping up on me for months. Why had I let it get this far? The answer was clear now. Trust. I had trusted Sarah. I had trusted Marcus. And that trust had been my downfall. When Marcus had asked me to sign that power of attorney, I hadn't read the fine print. Family is family, after all. My eyes weren't what they used to be. The words blurred on the page. And Sarah, my sweet, innocent girl, had smiled that smile, the one that always reminded me of her mother, and nodded, agreeing that it was for the best. So, I signed. And just like that, everything slipped away from me. Everything I worked for, everything I had built, was taken. How could I have been so blind? But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The silence from Sarah, the way she never once stepped in to stop Marcus, it wasn't just about fear. It was about something else, something darker. Something more insidious. And now, in the cold garage, with the faint sound of rain tapping against the window, I could feel something shifting. This wasn't just about fighting for my own life anymore. It was about fighting for Lucas, for the son who had walked into that hellhole, not with anger, but with purpose. He's coming for me, I realized. I wasn't sure how long I sat there in the dark, staring at the pieces of broken glass, but it felt like hours. Maybe even days. Each moment dragged on, but at the same time, I knew Lucas was out there, doing what he needed to do. He was gathering evidence. He was making his move. And it wasn't just for me. It was for us. For a family that had been broken by greed, by lies. And for a son who was finally ready to fight for what was right. A part of me couldn't believe it was happening. But another part of me felt a strange sense of calm. This was it. The beginning of something new. As I sat there, lost in thought, the door to the garage creaked open again. Lucas stepped in, looking as determined as ever. His face was still tight with the strain of everything that had happened, but there was something in his eyes now. Something different. "Dad," he said softly, his voice laced with exhaustion. "We need to move quickly. There's no time to waste." He walked over to the workbench, his eyes briefly scanning the broken watch, the wreckage of my life. I nodded slowly, feeling a lump form in my throat. He's not giving up on me. I had thought, for so long, that I was beyond saving. That my life had been reduced to a series of shattered moments, each one more painful than the last. But here was Lucas, my son, telling me that it wasn't too late. "Marcus is going to fight back," Lucas said, pulling out his phone and showing me a video. "He's trying to spin this into something else, but I have proof. And we're going to use it." The phone screen flickered with the video of Marcus's voice, his words cold and calculating. "The pension is mine now. I control the assets. He lives here. Those are the rules." The same words he had said earlier, a confession of everything he had stolen. I felt a rush of anger, an old fire that I hadn't known was still there, burned deep in my chest. This wasn't just about money. This was about the degradation of everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not anymore. As Lucas finished showing me the video, I felt a rush of resolve wash over me. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. It was about taking back what was mine, taking back my life. Lucas's eyes met mine. The rain had been falling steadily for days now, a relentless curtain of gray that seemed to mirror the storm inside me. Every drop that hit the roof echoed in the silence, a soft, rhythmic reminder of the slow unraveling of my life. I sat in the garage, shivering, not from the cold, but from the feeling that everything was coming to a head. Lucas hadn't left my side. His presence was a constant, a tether to the reality that there was still a way out, that I wasn't completely lost. But Marcus was growing more brazen, more confident with every passing day. And that confidence was dangerous. I could feel the tension building in the air, thick and oppressive, as if the storm outside was about to break and wash everything clean. I hadn't spoken to Sarah since the day Lucas came to rescue me. She hadn't called, hadn't visited. I didn't know if it was guilt, shame, or fear keeping her away, but I couldn't think about that now. I had to focus on what was in front of me. Survive. Take back what's mine. Stand tall again. Lucas had been working tirelessly to gather evidence, to make sure Marcus couldn't wiggle his way out of the mess he had made. He knew Marcus better than anyone. He knew how he would try to manipulate, try to twist the truth into something that suited him. But this time, Lucas had the upper hand. He had the recordings, the medical reports, the proof that I wasn't just a man slowly losing his mind. I was a victim of a system built on lies. Lucas showed me everything he had gathered, everything that had taken months to compile. It was a trail of deceit, of financial manipulation, and of physical neglect. Dr. Vane's reports were damning, the photos taken of my bruises, the weight I'd lost, the scarring from sleeping on the hard concrete floor. Every piece of evidence was a blow to Marcus, a small victory for me. But as the days wore on, I could feel the walls closing in. The situation was growing more dangerous by the hour. I couldn't stay hidden forever. And I knew Marcus was going to do everything he could to stop us. "Dad," Lucas said, looking at me with a mixture of concern and determination. "We need to be ready. The hearing's coming up soon, but we have to make sure Marcus can't get to you before then." I nodded. It was all coming together, but I could feel the pressure mounting. What if Marcus found out what we were doing? What if he moved faster than we anticipated? I wasn't ready to be a victim anymore. Not today. The idea of standing up in front of a judge, of facing the man who had taken everything from me, was terrifying. But I knew I had no choice. This was the moment when everything would either crumble or I would rebuild. There would be no middle ground. The night before the hearing, the tension was unbearable. I lay awake in the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with a million thoughts. Lucas was asleep on the couch, his phone screen flickering as he scrolled through something. I knew he was preparing. He was always preparing. But in that moment, I realized something. I was preparing too. I was preparing for the fight of my life. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the gray clouds still hung heavy in the sky. The courthouse loomed ahead like a fortress, cold and imposing. I felt small walking through its gates, my body aching from the stress of the last few months. But I wasn't weak. I wasn't the man who had signed away his future without thinking. I was Elias Thorne, a man who had built bridges, designed skyscrapers that reached for the sky. I wasn't going to let a thief take it all away from me. As we walked into the courtroom, the walls felt like they were closing in. Marcus and Sarah were already there, sitting at the table across from us. Marcus was trying to hold his head high, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around nervously. He knew the game was up. The pieces were falling into place, and there was no way out for him. Sarah didn't look at me. She never did. I couldn't understand why she'd chosen him. Why she'd allowed this to happen. But I couldn't focus on her. Not now. Now, it was all about Marcus. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp, calculating eyes, looked over the paperwork with a slow, deliberate gaze. I could feel her measuring me, weighing the situation. She was no fool. She'd seen cases like this before. But Marcus's arrogance, his smug confidence, wasn't going to carry him this time. Mr. Thorne, she said, looking up from the files. Your son has provided us with some compelling evidence of elder abuse and financial exploitation. But I need to hear your side of the story. I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my hands were steady. This is it. I stood up, my knees aching, and faced the judge. My voice was low at first, unsure, but as I spoke, it grew stronger. I told her about the power of attorney, about the way Marcus had manipulated me, how he had lied, how he had pushed me into that garage. I told her about the physical abuse, the way my own daughter had stood by and done nothing. The way Marcus had robbed me of everything, piece by piece. The silence in the room was deafening as I spoke, but when I finished, there was a heaviness in the air that couldn't be ignored. The judge sat quietly, looking over the evidence. Marcus's lawyer stood up, attempting to counter, to twist the truth in his favor. But it was too late. The proof was overwhelming. And then, the moment came. The moment that I knew would change everything. Mr. Matthews, Judge Sterling said, her voice cold and firm. It's clear that the power of attorney was abused. Your actions have caused irreparable harm to Mr. Thorne. Your legal rights are hereby revoked. I am issuing a restraining order against you, and I am referring this case for criminal charges. You will be arrested. The words hit me like a hammer. I almost couldn't believe it. The man who had terrorized me for months was finally being held accountable. And then, as I walked out of that courtroom, the weight that had been crushing me for so long started to lift. I'm free. The courtroom doors closed behind us with a soft click, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe. The air in the hall felt different, lighter somehow, as if the weight of 100 pounds had been lifted off my chest. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. The battle wasn't finished, but for the first time, I had a sense of something I hadn't had in months, hope. Lucas stood beside me, his hand lightly resting on my shoulder. His presence was a quiet reassurance, the anchor I didn't know I needed until I had it. He was there, unwavering, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting back. As we made our way out of the courthouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in me, something deep and profound. The man I was before all of this, the engineer, the father, the man with dignity and respect, he wasn't gone. He hadn't disappeared into the fog of betrayal and neglect. He was still here. And he was ready to fight for his life. Lucas didn't say much as we walked to the car, but the silence was comfortable. I knew he was processing everything, just like I was. The reality of the day's victory had yet to fully sink in, but there was a quiet pride in his eyes, a sense of accomplishment. He had been the one to stand by me, the one who refused to let me be forgotten. We arrived back at the hotel. The same place I had been hiding, waiting, thinking the worst of myself. But now, there was a change in the air. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was standing tall, facing what had been done to me. As Lucas opened the door, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me was thinner, grayer, more weathered than the man I had been just a few months ago. But there was something different about him. Something that hadn't been there when I was living in that garage, trapped by my own shame. That man was still here. He hadn't been broken. It was a strange feeling. The brokenness I had felt for so long, like I was just a shell of myself, a shadow of the man I used to be, was slowly fading away. I sat down on the bed, the room still unfamiliar to me, the soft comfort of the sheets almost too luxurious. The simple things felt so strange now. Warmth. Comfort. Security. I hadn't felt those things in so long, and I wondered if I could ever truly get used to them again. Lucas sat across from me, his eyes serious but full of understanding. "Dad," he started, his voice quiet but firm, "I know this isn't over. We still have a long way to go. But today was a victory. We're on the right path now." I nodded slowly, the words stirring something inside me. He was right. This wasn't just about the hearing, about the court case. It was about taking back control of my life. It was about reclaiming what had been taken from me, step by painful step. But there was a part of me, deep inside, that couldn't ignore the ache in my heart. The ache that came from realizing that Sarah, my daughter, was no longer part of this fight. She had abandoned me. Maybe she didn't know how to stand up to Marcus. Maybe she was too afraid. But whatever her reasons, it didn't change the fact that she chose him over me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. But I couldn't focus on that now. I couldn't let her silence, her absence, drown out the progress I was making. "Have you heard from her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lucas hesitated, looking down at his hands. "No. I tried to reach her, but she's not ready to face this. Not yet." I wasn't sure what I expected him to say, but hearing those words still cut deeper than I had anticipated. I couldn't deny it anymore. My daughter had chosen the man who had hurt me over her own flesh and blood. It hurt in a way I couldn't fully explain. But as I sat there, surrounded by the warmth of the hotel room and Lucas's quiet strength, I realized that maybe this was for the best. Maybe Sarah's silence was the final piece of the puzzle. I was done trying to fix what had already been broken. Marcus had taken my life from me, but I had spent the last few months taking it back. Piece by piece, I was starting to rebuild. And maybe that meant rebuilding without Sarah. "Lucas," I said, the words catching in my throat, "I don't know what's going to happen next. But I do know one thing. I'm not going to stop fighting. Not for you. Not for me." His eyes softened, and a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "I know, Dad. I know." And in that moment, I realized that no matter what the future held, we had each other. And that was more than I could have asked for. The weight of the world might still be on my shoulders, but I was no longer carrying it alone. The days that followed the court hearing were a whirlwind of emotions. There was a sense of relief, yes, but it was fleeting. The truth was, I had spent so long trying to survive, trying to hold on to whatever scraps of dignity I could, that now I was faced with the overwhelming task of rebuilding. Not just my life, but my very sense of self. It had been hard to admit it, but I was no longer the man I had once been. The man who built bridges that withstood earthquakes, who designed structures that pierced the clouds. That man had been worn down, crumbled under the weight of betrayal, of loss. But as the dust began to settle, I started to realize something: maybe I wasn't broken after all. The night after the hearing, I sat alone in the hotel room, staring at the flickering TV. Lucas was in the next room, making calls, organizing things. I could hear him, but there was a stillness in the air that made it hard to focus. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the sharp pain of loss. I felt a strange kind of peace. But I couldn't stay here forever. I couldn't live in the past. It was time to move forward. The next day, Lucas took me to a small cafe downtown, a place I'd never been before. It had thick carpets, warm lighting, and the smell of fresh coffee that wrapped itself around me like a comforting hug. It felt normal. Comfortable. Safe. But even in a place like this, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still in the process of rebuilding. That this wasn't just about regaining control of my finances, but of my life. Over coffee, we talked about the future, what came next for me. What came next for us. I've been thinking about what we need to do next, Dad, Lucas said, his voice steady. We have to get everything back. You deserve that. But we also need to make sure Marcus can never touch you again. I nodded. I didn't have to think about it for long. It was clear. Marcus was a disease, and the only way to stop it was to cut it out, once and for all. But even then, a part of me wondered, would it ever really be over? Could I ever trust again? Could I ever rebuild the family I had once cherished? Maybe it's time we go back, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Go back to the house. Start making it our own again. We can rebuild that, too. Lucas's eyes softened, but he didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, he reached across the table and took my hand. It was a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. You're not alone, Dad. Not anymore. I'll be there every step of the way, he said, his voice firm. But it's not just about the house. It's about us. About reclaiming what was taken from us. It's time for you to stand tall again. And that was it. That was the moment when I realized that I didn't have to do this alone. I didn't have to rebuild everything on my own. I had Lucas. I had my son. And with him by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. A few days later, we stood in front of the house I had worked so hard for, the house that had once been a symbol of everything I had achieved. But now, standing there with Lucas, it felt different. The house was no longer a place of torment, but a place of opportunity. A blank canvas. We walked through the front door together. The space inside was eerily quiet, the walls stripped of their warmth and memories. It was empty, a shell of what it used to be. But as we walked through the rooms, I could almost see it all come back to life. The laughter. The love. The comfort. It was time to make it ours again. I started with the garden, one of the few things I had always taken pride in. The plants, the flowers, the soil that I had spent so many hours tending. They had all been neglected during the last few months, but as I dug my hands into the earth, I felt a sense of connection again. I can rebuild this, I thought. I can rebuild everything. Later that day, Lucas came to find me in the backyard. He stood at the edge of the garden, watching me work. "You're doing it, aren't you?" he said, a quiet smile on his face. "Rebuilding." I wiped the sweat from my brow, standing up slowly to face him. "I am. I thought I had lost everything. But maybe that was just the beginning. Maybe we needed to fall apart to figure out how to put everything back together." Lucas's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with pride. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I know it hasn't been easy. But you've done it. You found your strength again." For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. Slowly but surely, I started to reclaim my life. I started to take control of my finances again, working with lawyers to make sure Marcus could never touch me, or my assets, again. We made arrangements to sell the house, but not the property. The garden, the land, the space where I had spent so many years creating something beautiful, it would remain in our hands. I was no longer the man who had signed away everything in a moment of weakness. I was no longer the man who had been trapped in the dark, alone. I was Elias Thorne, a man who had built bridges that stood strong, who had designed structures that lasted through storms. And now, I was rebuilding. Not just buildings. Not just bridges. I was rebuilding myself. Closing thoughts. Life is fragile. It's made of so many pieces that can break apart without warning. But no matter how many times you fall, no matter how many times you're knocked down, you always have the power to rise again. To rebuild. To reclaim what's yours. And to find strength in places you never thought possible. The future. It's still uncertain. But with my son by my side, and the strength I've found within myself, I know one thing for sure. I'm no longer a victim. I'm a survivor. And this story is just beginning.